that optimistic about a vaccine is that if you look at the history of viral diseases, there are cases that we have very good successes in the control of measles, polio, smallpox was eradicated by vaccines, and yellow fever is largely controlled because of vaccinations. And now to date, we have 3 vaccines that are quite promising, and we say 3 because these are the vaccines that have been shared widely by their manufacturers, so the information is well in the public domain. We know that the other vaccines, like one in Russia, the Sputnik vaccine, and we have 2 vaccines in China that are also being used in those respective countries, but the knowledge, the scientific information about them is not that widely known. So at the moment, we talk of 3 vaccines that are quite promising. And so this is the Pfizer, BioNTech, the Moderna, and the Oxford AstraZeneca vaccines. And so this is just a pictorial pictures of these vaccines that we're talking about, the 3 famous vaccines that are very promising. So the question is, how are vaccines made? And because this is a mixed audience, there are quite a number of scientists, but then there are also others who are not, would like to just remind the audience that we have different ways in which vaccines are made. We can take the germ that causes the disease and then we weaken it. And so we have what we call a live attenuated vaccine. Attenuation just means that it has been weakened, so it's not capable of causing disease. But it maintains its structure. Then we have a killed pathogen. You pick the pathogen and kill it, and that is how we make killed vaccine. So that's not a live vaccine. Then we have a part of the pathogens. We can take part of the pathogen and make a vaccines out of it, that when the body sees it, it thinks it has seen the whole pathogen, but it has only seen a portion of the pathogen. And that is what we call the particle vaccines. And we can also use the genetic material of the pathogen. Now, firstly, RNA vaccines or DNA vaccines, where you use the nucleic acid to develop the vaccine. So these are called nucleic acid vaccines. But you can take the genetic material of the pathogen and then put it a delivery vehicle. And this is what is called vectored vaccines. So the purpose of using a vehicle is that it makes the body recognize the genetic material that is in the vaccines much easily than if it is just given naked without being put in a vehicle. Now, the leading COVID-19 vaccines are of 4 types. So we have the whole killed virus, we have virus particles, we have nucleic acid vaccines, so the RNA or DNA. We have vectored vaccines, and the vector that is largely used for the current COVID-19 vaccines is the adenovirus. We have the beauty about the RNA is that it is destroyed shortly after vaccination, so it doesn't stay, hang around in the body for a while. And it also does not enter into the nucleus, so therefore it is not to integrate DNA and change it in any form. So this is a cartoon presentation of the COVID vaccines that are currently being developed. So top one, where you have the live attenuated, so the whole virus is there, just weaken it. So pictorially, all you can see is that the image has been changed a little as a result of the attenuation. So we also have the lipid, where you take the nucleic acid of the virus, and then you put it into what you call a lipid nanoparticle. So you take the mRNA. The reason you put in the liquid nanoparticle is that the messenger RNA on its own is weak, and if it gets into a cell, it is destroyed immediately. So you put to this lipid membrane to make it survive a bit longer and get into the cell. You can take a portion of the DNA plasmid and make a vaccine out of it. But you can also have what you call the non-replicating viral vector. And the example that you've said a lot is adenovirus, where you put the genetic material into it and it acts as a vehicle for the body to recognize it much more easily. But then how are vaccines tested? We develop vaccines through a number of stages. We start with preclinical trials, where the vaccine that has been developed is a potential vaccine that has been developed. It's tested in laboratory animals. And typically we use the small animals like the mice, but you can also use the larger animals like the apes, the non-human primates. But then the vaccines that are found to be safe and to be immunogenic in the preclinical trials are the ones that are then pushed into clinical trials in human beings. And clinical trials in human beings are divided into 4 phases that are done sequentially. In phase 1, the focus of the vaccine is to find out how safe it is in human beings. Already you have some data from animals in the preclinical trials. Now you want to find out if what you saw in animals are also seen in human beings. And for this purpose, we have small numbers of people who are then given the vaccine and very closely monitored for any adverse events. Only vaccines that are found to be safe in phase 1 studies in these small numbers of people are then pushed into phase 2, where the focus shifts a little bit so that we now focus on to whether these vaccines are able to produce the immune responses in human beings that are desired to prevent an infection. And during this phase also, we gather additional data on safety. The focus is on immune responses, but we also then generate additional data on safety. And for this purpose, we usually have slightly more numbers of participants, where we talk about 100 to people in the trial. Then vaccines that are found to produce the immune response that are desired and also shown to be safe, and the ones that are pushed into phase 3, what we call the efficacy trials. And the focus in a phase 3 trial is to find out if the immune responses that were generated in phase 2 are capable of then protecting us from getting infection. And for the efficacy trials, by nature, they have to be large for us to be able to get the sufficient proof that the vaccine works. And we use thousands of people. So the vaccines that are current COVID vaccines that are being pushed into marketing have dealt with roughly between 35,000 and 45,000 people. And it's information that is used to register a vaccine. Once a vaccine is registered, we have a phase that is called phase 4, which is largely pharmacovigilance or post-marketing surveillance, where we get additional information with the use of the vaccine at a population level. Remember, in a clinical trial, even in an efficacy trial, although we use large numbers like 35,000, 45,000 people, it is from that information that then the vaccine will be used by the general population into their billions. And so there's something that might not have been noticed during the clinical trials with about 45,000 people. And it is important that we keep on generating information about the vaccine. Now, so this is a pictorial presentation of what we do in a safety study. You give a first volunteer the vaccine, you review the safety data, and if it is in the sense that there is a very good safety profile, you then add more people to be vaccinated. If you do a few people, the first person you give the vaccine, you review the safety data, and there's some safety concern, you stop, you do not include any more studies, any more participants in that study. Now, if you look at what happens, if you look pictorially, generally, the of developing a vaccine can take very many years. If you start in exploratory preclinical phase where you're using laboratory animals, they can take about 2 to 3 years before you get sufficient information for you to say whether that vaccine should be pushed to a phase 1 or not. A phase 1 trial stage normally takes about 2 to 3 years, and then you go to a phase 2, taking about another 2 to 3 years. And as you notice, the numbers are increasing. Here we started with an animal, then we went to a few people, then the numbers in a phase 2 increased, and then in a phase 3 where you're having thousands of people, takes another 2 to 3 years. And it is after that that you apply for approval or registration of the vaccine. And once it is approved, then you do what you call post-market surveillance. Okay, and that takes about 2 years. So if you look at this timeline, it takes a long time, about 10 to 15 years to develop a vaccine. Now, if you look at the path that COVID-19 vaccine has taken so far, many people do not really realize that although we just have about 3 vaccines that we are now talking about use in human beings, there are many vaccines that are still in different stages of development. So if you look at this picture, and this is about November last year, you find that there are so many vaccines that are still in the preclinical stages. They're being tested in animals. And if you want to know the type of the vaccines that are in this, you look at the nucleic acid vaccines, and now we've already talked about what nucleic acid vaccines are. They are there. If you look at in terms of viral vectors, the proportions are there. The vaccines that are using the whole virus are there. And some have already even been abandoned. So these are studies that, these are vaccines that during the preclinical phase have not been shown to be immunogenic enough or have not been shown to be safe enough to be pushed to human trials. The ones that have already entered human trials, what we call clinical trials, that are divided into phase 1, phase 2, phase 3 before approval, we had by last year about 20 vaccines in phase 1 studies. And the proportions in terms of the types of the vaccines these are is shown there. Nucleic acid, the protein-based, the viral vectors, and the whole virus was only 1. In the phase 2, these are the vaccines that had already been shown to be safe in phase 1 and moved to phase 2 to generate more information on immunogenicity of these vaccines. We had about 16 vaccines, and the type of the vaccines are also illustrated there. And the phase 3 vaccines were 13 that were being tested for efficacy. By that time, there were only 2 that had been approved, but now we have 3 that have already been approved, and we mentioned them at the beginning of this presentation. So how were COVID vaccines faster than the time frame we've shown, taking about 12 to 15 years? This has raised a bit of concerns, and people have raised aspersion as to the safety of the vaccines because of the record time that it has taken for them to develop. So what we need to know is that the COVID-19 vaccine development took the required, they followed the processes that we've discussed above. None of these processes were jumped. We've had people talking about all vaccines were not tested in animals. We've shown you a typical presentation of many vaccines that are still in animal phases before they come to clinical trials. So some have raised concerns about their safety. The record development of COVID-19 vaccine, however, can be attributed to several factors, and these are just examples. One is that this vaccine development were not starting from scratch. They were building on existing platforms that had been used for development of other vaccines, and notably Ebola. When Ebola outbreak came, there are many drug companies that started developing vaccines against Ebola. And so they had a platform that could quickly be remodified for developing a COVID-19 vaccine. The other thing is the global political goodwill. Being a pandemic, the whole world focus is on developing a COVID-19 vaccine. And so there's a lot of political goodwill. And this political goodwill has even extended into the processing of the stages in which vaccines are developed. So for example, you then jump the queue. So if there was some funds that people are looking for development of other vaccines, they would then be diverted into COVID vaccine development just because of the urgency that is required. The regulatory bodies that we're going to talk about shortly also give priority to COVID vaccine studies that includes vaccines and treatment. And then the other thing that has contributed to very quick development of COVID-19 vaccines is the use of new technologies like that of messenger RNA. These are newer developments that makes it much easier and possible to make the process much shorter than what used to be previously. The question then comes, are current COVID-19 vaccines safe? And here we are focusing on the ones that have already been studied and being applied for registration so that the general public can use them. So I would say that they have thoroughly been evaluated for safety, as we've said, from animal studies to phase 1, phase 2, and phase 3 studies. And all these vaccines have been shown to have a very good safety profile. The side effects that have been noted include flu-like symptoms, pain at the injection site, redness and swelling in the site, mild fever, tiredness, headache, muscles, chills, and this just lasts for a few days. Most side effects occur within the first few days of vaccination, and then they resolve. And what are the benefits of using COVID-19 vaccines? One is that they protect, the ones that have been shown, they protect against getting COVID-19. And we are talking about symptomatic COVID-19. They can also protect getting severe COVID-19 disease. So the studies have shown that even the ones who are vaccinated and still get symptomatic COVID-19, the disease is much less severe than the ones who are not vaccinated. There's a question and a query as to whether it will protect transmission of infection to the contacts of the vaccinated people, and that more data is still being generated for us to be very certain, and depends also on the vaccine that we are talking about. And so each vaccine objective is to also generate information as to whether it can prevent transmission to contacts. The benefits of then being given vaccine is that it will help to open up the economy. People will be able to go back to work. Businesses will then also be able to open up. It will facilitate resumption of travel, reopening of schools, and even places of worship, which we know have been affected by the isolation. And who will be given the vaccine? Vaccines will not be enough for everybody, and we realize that. So each country has to set up criteria for determining who is to be given priority for vaccination. And many countries focus on healthcare workers, those with pre-existing conditions like diabetes, high blood pressure, and cancers, the elderly people who are most at risk of getting severe disease. And then some countries have also included teachers, like Kenya is one of those that has said teachers would also be given priority. And then the uniformed forces, the security personnel, like the police and the military. But each country is left to determine for itself what will be prioritized. Do we need more COVID-19 vaccine? And I would say yes, there's need to get more and better vaccines. Currently, there are 16 vaccines that have advanced much further into the clinical trials, but we need better performing vaccines, easier to store vaccines, easier dosages, and even cheaper vaccines that will be able to go around, especially in the resource-limited countries. Now, the easy to give vaccines would be one, an ideal vaccine is the one that will be highly efficacious, that will be given as a single dose, and that will have a long duration of protection. At the moment, we don't know how long the duration of protection will be for these vaccines because they are fairly new. But an ideal one should be able to give us long durations. One of these examples is the yellow fever vaccine that for a long time we've been giving after every 10 years because the protection can last that long. Therefore, for this purpose of improving and getting better vaccine, there is need to have more clinical trials. But should Kenyans participate in COVID-19 vaccine trials? And I'd say yes. Why should Kenya then participate in COVID-19 vaccine trials? One is that Kenya is part of the global community, and we cannot afford just to sit and wait for the world to get solutions to a global problem. I think we should be part of getting a solution. The other thing is that we will then contribute to getting evidence of if the vaccine works in an African population. Remember, human beings have of different genetic makeup, and it is possible that you'd have a vaccine that works very well in one genetic population and not in another. And it is for this reason that the drug companies are trying to get as diverse as possible a study population to be able to test this vaccine. And I believe that by Kenyans participating in this vaccine, it will also be able to help us to know how well the vaccine works in an African population. Thirdly, and probably very important for us to know, is that participating in a vaccine trial ensures that you're put up amongst the first people who will get that vaccine when it becomes available. And this is for ethical reasons. This is called post-trial access. It is not ethical to test a product in a particular population and then not make that product available to that population and use it elsewhere. So if Kenya participates in clinical trials of a COVID vaccine, we will be given priority when that vaccine becomes available if the studies show that the vaccine is efficacious. Now, if you look at the clinical trials that are going on in the world currently, these are phase 1 trials. If you look at the phase 1 trials that are going on in the country, unfortunately, Africa is very, very absent. If you can see, these writings up are actually pointing to what is happening in Europe. So you find in the US, Canada, Europe, the UK, Russia, China, India, Australia, Africa is missing in phase 1 trials. If you look at the phase 2 trials that are ongoing in the world, again, the same picture occurs. You find that there's some trials going on in the US, there's some trials going on in Europe, and it even tells you what type of vaccine trials are going on there. This is like the RNA, the viral vectors in China, in India, and so on. Africa is missing in that picture. If you go to phase 3 trials, and this has changed a little, because from the time this was put, we have Kenya and South Africa that have participated in the Oxford AstraZeneca vaccine trials. But the picture is the same. You find that a lot of work is going on in other parts of the world, but Africa is conspicuously missing. I want to then talk about a proposed COVID-19 vaccine trial that we are hoping that we'll be part of soon. And this is a trial that is testing the efficacy and immunogenicity and safety of a recombinant protein vaccine in adults aged 18 years and older. It is a multi-site, multi-country trial that we are hoping to begin soon. In Kenya, we are hoping to have 6 sites in different parts of the country, in Nairobi, Kilifi, Kericho, Kisumu, Thika. And in Nairobi, one of the sites will be Kavi Institute of Clinical Research and Kenyatta National Hospital. And the sponsor for this particular trial is Sanofi. The objective of this vaccine trial will be to assess the clinical efficacy of this recombinant protein vaccine for the prevention of symptomatic COVID-19. And the second objective will be to assess safety of the vaccine when compared to a placebo. The design is a phase 3 trial because it's an efficacy trial, and it's a double-blinded, randomized controlled trial where it will be given in a ratio 1:1. So a ratio of 1:1 for vaccine versus the placebo. The participants, it will be an open recruitment, but will include healthcare workers and other professions as well. The vaccine will be given intramuscularly in 2 doses, 21 days apart. The beauty with this vaccine is that the storage will be normal refrigerator, 4 to 8 degrees centigrade. If you remember, and I'm sure you're aware of, that 2 of the most promising vaccines are stored at very low temperatures, ultra cold temperatures of -70 degrees centigrade for the Pfizer vaccine and -20 degrees centigrade for the Moderna vaccine. And those conditions are very, very difficult to keep, especially in a tropical country like Kenya. And besides that, transporting them becomes very, very expensive because you require very specialized transport vehicles that are able to keep the vaccines at these very, very cold temperatures. And the manufacturers of these vaccines, the Pfizer vaccines, for example, have designed very specific vehicles that are used for transporting these vaccines, which would be very, very expensive if they were to be used by a country like Kenya. So this recombinant protein, what is the recombinant protein that is going to be used in this vaccine is what we call protein S1, and the protein is from the spike protein of the COVID vaccine, of the COVID virus. Remember, the COVID virus has these spikes that it uses for attachment. And if you get a protein from the spike protein and use it to make a vaccine, when the body sees the recombinant protein, it thinks it has seen the virus and therefore produces cells, specific cells to fight the virus, and also produces specific antibodies to fight the virus. This protein in this vaccine is given through an adjuvant, and that adjuvant is called ASO3. An adjuvant makes it easier for the body to recognize the protein that are in the vaccine. Now, this particular vaccine, phase 1 clinical trials are ongoing. They're almost being terminated. And here it is evaluating immunogenicity and safety in young and older adults. Actually, the phase 1 now has ended. We are now into phase 2. And the phase 2, we'll be looking at 2 doses. They're looking at 2 doses, 5 micrograms versus 15 micrograms. And they're also looking at 2 dose schedules where you can give 1 vaccine and then you give the second vaccine 21 days apart. The vaccine dose and schedule for this proposed phase 3 study that we are planning will be determined based on the safety and immunogenicity from the results of this study. So we'll be able to determine whether to give 5 micrograms or 15 micrograms. And we'll also be able to determine whether to give these scheduled doses as to 1 versus 2 vaccines given 21 days apart. We're hoping that probably it will be a single vaccine, but we never know. We will get that from the study of the phase 2 vaccine that is ongoing. For this proposed study, the inclusion criteria, we'll be looking for people who are 18 years and above on the day of vaccination. We'll be looking at people who will be able to attend all the scheduled visits. For females who want to participate in this vaccine and they're of childbearing age, they should not be pregnant, nor be breastfeeding. They should be willing to use contraceptive throughout the study period, and they should be willing to undergo a pregnancy test less than 4 hours before the vaccination. If the vaccines will be given on 2 occasions, 21 days apart, on each of the vaccination days, a pregnancy test will be done before the vaccine is given. Now, for the females who are non-childbearing age, would be postmenopausal women, and the duration after menopause should be more than 1 year, or there should be evidence of surgical sterility like tubal ligation. This study will also allow us to examine HIV positive participants, and that is one of the beauties of this study. Knowing that HIV is a major problem in this part of the world, it is important that we know that a vaccine that we will be able to use against COVID-19 would be safe in people who are HIV positive. And for this particular study, the HIV positive people who qualify to be included in this study would be people on antiretrovirals and with CD4 counts of at least 200 per millimeter cube. The other thing that we want to do in this particular vaccine trial is that at least 35% of the study participants will be in the high-risk medical conditions. And it is for the same argument that if you get a vaccine, we want it to be useful and can be given in people with these high-risk medical conditions. And this includes people with cancer, people with chronic kidney diseases, chronic obstructive pulmonary disease, immunosuppressions, people who have had organ transplant and are on immunosuppressants, obese people with BMIs of more than 30, those with cardiovascular conditions like high blood pressure, heart failure, coronary artery diseases, cardiomyopathies, among others, the sickle cell disease and thalassemias, the diabetes mellitus, type 1 and type 2, those with moderate to severe asthmas, and those who smoke, because this puts people at higher risk of getting COVID-19. And so we'd have to include about 35% of the study population. The stratifications will also be by age. We'd want to have some people who would be between 18 and 64 years. And then we'll also want to recruit an older population of 65 years and above. We'll also do a basic baseline rapid serodiagnostic test for COVID antibodies to see those who are positive and those who are negative. The study population for this vaccine is 34,520, and CAVI will be recruiting 350 study participants, but it is a competitive recruitment process. And so if other sites finish their allocated numbers before CAVI, they will then withdraw, that this number will become less. But it's our hope that we'll be able to supersede this number and that we'll be able to recruit even more than 350, so that once we reach our max, we can then be able to be given others because it is a competitive recruitment. The study scheduled visits, there are 7 study visits, and the study will only last 1 year. So from the time of enrollment to the end of the study, there will be 7 study visits. And of this, either 1 or 2 will be vaccinations, depending on the outcome of the phase 2 studies that is going on. Most probably it will be 2, where you give 1 injection and then a second injection 21 days apart. The endpoints will be the occurrence of symptomatic COVID-19, and because of safety reasons, we'll also be generating information on adverse events. The approval process to conduct this clinical trial will be the usual, where it goes through an ethics committee, and so we'll be submitting the protocol to the Kenyatta National Hospital, University of Nairobi Ethics and Research Committee for their review and comments and approval if they're satisfied with it. And then we'll be passing it to the Pharmacy and Poisons Board, which is the national drug regulatory authority for this country. So for them to also review it, give their comment and approve it. And after that, we'll be getting the National Commission for Science, Technology and Innovation, NACOSTI, will be applying for a research permit to be able to conduct the country. So all the procedures that will be required for a normal clinical trial will be followed. And the proposed start date for this vaccine is hoped will be February or March 2021, depending on how soon we'll be able to put the dossier together for review by the regulatory authorities. What are the anticipated challenges from this, conducting this clinical trial? One of the problems that we have with any group that will be conducting COVID-19 vaccine clinical trials is the anti-vaccine lobby group. There's a lot of misinformation that is out, especially in the social media, as to the safety of COVID vaccines. And they are lumped together There's a lot of misinformation about the vaccines integrating with the human DNA. There's a lot of misinformation about privacy, that when you participate or when you're given a COVID-19 vaccine, your privacy will be compromised. You can be traced wherever you are. And so there's a lot of misinformation. So one of the things that would have to work very hard at is to correct the misconceptions that are out in the public. The other thing is just the logistics in coordinating the large number of study participants. Typically, vaccine trials are, they're very intense. They are very, very, very intense. Are monitored very, very closely. Any adverse events. In these particular trials, the study participants will they will be using a diary, either a manual, a handwritten diary, or an electronic diary that they can download in their phones, and then they'll be able to record whatever adverse events that they get post-vaccination, and this will be viewed at the study sites by the trial team. So there will be a lot of coordination that will be required for this particular trial. The other challenge that we see is that the government of Kenya has announced that they'll be beginning a vaccination program for healthcare workers. Probably this will be in February, which is a good thing. The challenge it has for vaccine trials, if you include people who will then have access to the vaccination, then you then have to stop the vaccine, the participation in the clinical trial. You have to give the participants the choice as to whether they want to continue with the vaccine trial and then get their government vaccination after the trial, or they want to postpone participating in the trial so that they can get the government of Kenya vaccination. The choice is there. You cannot hold study participants into a trial where there is an opportunity for them to get an already registered vaccine. So in summary, what have we looked at? We have looked at, an outline of how vaccines are made. We have discussed how vaccines are tested, starting from preclinical trials to clinical trials. And we have looked at the clinical trials being done in phases. We're looking at phase 1, phase 2, phase 3, then applying for licensure. And after that, we have phase 4, which is post-marketing trials. We have then examined how COVID-19 vaccines were developed that quickly. And we have examined the safety of the existing COVID-19 vaccine so far. Just remember that any vaccine that is being developed, we have to test its safety. So we cannot rely on the safety of other vaccines and assume that any COVID-19 vaccine that will be developed will be safe. So it has to be tested in animals, then it has to be tested in phase 1 in human beings for us to determine its own safety. We have also described the benefits of using a COVID-19 vaccine. We have discussed who should be given, and this depends from one country to the others, but there are some common factors in the countries that in the people who will be prioritized to get COVID-19 vaccines across the countries. We've also discussed the need for more COVID-19 vaccines. We've said that when you do more and more clinical trials and more different vaccines, you polish, you get vaccines that are more efficacious, you get vaccines that are much easier to store and to transport, and you also get vaccines that are much convenient to give in terms of a single dose, and you can get vaccines that also have much longer duration of action. We've discussed the needs for Kenya participating in vaccine trials. We've said it is a global pandemic and Kenya is part of the global society, and we cannot just sit and wait for the rest of the world to get a solution for a problem that is global. Kenya must participate in trying to get a solution to this problem. Secondly, that by Kenyans participating in the vaccine trial, we'll be able to know for sure how efficacious the vaccine is in our local population. And also that by participating in a COVID vaccine trial, it gives us access, post-trial access to the vaccine. So we go higher up in the pile. amongst the countries that will get the vaccine before the others. We then also discussed the potential COVID-19 vaccine trial that we are hoping to start here at Coveted, University of Nairobi, and Kenyatta National Hospital. I think I'll stop there and just thank you and thank all the healthcare workers who have really played a very significant role in helping to contain the pandemic and to keep us safe wherever we are. And I will end by giving you a contact address for anybody who would be interested in participating in the proposed COVID vaccine trials, or if you just want to get some more information, ask questions, raise any concerns that you might be having. This is an email address that we would be more than willing to respond to any queries about the COVID vaccine clinical trials. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Professor. That was a very informative session, very clear. So we can quickly go through some questions that people have raised. So Anthony Wanyoro has asked, how do you determine how to recruit for phase 1 trial?
Okay, so for phase 1, okay, so yeah, should I go on? Should I take several questions or should I answer as they come?
You can take that one because there's nothing similar to that one.
Okay, so what happens in a phase 1 trials? That is an important question. Phase 1 trials, the key thing in phase 1 trial, normal participants. So what we mean by normal participants? So we want to recruit people who do not have any health conditions. And so there is a screening that is done. So for those who are willing, you must be, of course, be 18 years and above, because you have to give us your written informed consent. The study is thoroughly explained to the study participants so that they can make a decision as to whether they want to be involved in the study or not. And then we have to screen. So we screen for any medical condition. We use history. So the study participants, potential study participants, gives us their history if they've had medical issues before. And then we do laboratory tests. The tests that we do include a renal function test. We want to ensure that the kidneys are functioning well, the liver is functioning well. So we do liver function. We look at what we call hemogram. We look at the blood levels. We look at the different types of the white blood cells that they have, that they're sufficient, and so on and so forth. So in short, we want healthy people to participate in phase 1 trials.
Thank you. Another interesting question is there any remuneration? If you volunteer? And you've shown us how to volunteer, which has answered majority of other people's questions. So others also want to know if they get remuneration from it.
Okay, so thank you so much. So what we do, we actually desire that people participating in any trial, and in this case, we are talking about the COVID vaccine trial, that we reimburse. We don't like using the term remuneration because it's not an occupation. We'd want to reimburse people for their transport and the time that they spend here. So there's a modest fee that is given to potential study participants when they enroll into our studies. The fee should not be large, so large as to induce people. We talk about undue influence, where people come into the study not considering the details and the risk of participation in the study. Their judgment is clouded by the reimbursement. So before we start any study, the amount of money that we'll use to reimburse the study participant is reviewed and approved by an independent ethics review committee. And in our case, it's Kenyatta National Hospital, University of Nairobi Ethics Review Committee.
Thank you very much for that. You can ask questions by raising hands, like Ivy Muya, and if she can be unmuted, she can ask a question. Okay, I think that's taking long, but
may I ask something before Ivy joins?
yes.
This is Masika, and thanks, Prof, for that illuminating presentation. I have 3 questions, and one of them is where you ended it, that we now that we are getting some vaccines licensed, we might find a challenge where people have an option of taking the vaccine that is licensed or taking the study vaccine. Do you feel like at some point we might actually be required to give the gold standard, which is if we actually have a licensed vaccine, that becomes a gold standard ethically and everybody has to be on it? And secondly, we've had a few vaccines, a lot of discussion actually on whether the vaccines are enough for everybody. And in Kenya, I know we are looking West, UK and US mainly, especially UK vaccine, AstraZeneca. But do you think there's also an opportunity for us to consider looking East? There's a Sinopharm, which, although the data when published is limited, an inactivated vaccine that has been licensed in parts of the Middle East and also China. And do you think it's worth looking at the safety data from that side as well? And is it likely to be picked up by the people if we were to select an Eastern, so to speak, vaccine rather than the ones we are looking at in the West, especially if this is going to get us more doses quickly? And finally, I'd like you to mention or comment on the cause criteria, which tends to cause a lot of the panic when the trials have to be paused for one reason or another. Thanks.
Okay, yeah, thank you. So, thank you for those questions. They're very, very important questions there. So first of all, in terms of using the standard of care as another vaccine, once the 3 current major ones, the front runners, so to speak, have become licensed. It's an important question. The problem, though, at the moment, is that they will not be available. Just by the sheer quantities of people who require to be vaccinated, no country will be able to get, at least no developing countries will be able to get vaccines sufficient for their population, in sufficient numbers for their population. So before that, if you design any clinical trial whereby you are insisting and saying that the new vaccine can only be benchmarked against one of the existing registered vaccines, there'll be a challenge because the researchers will not even be able to get that vaccine for comparator. And so that is a problem at the beginning. But you're right. As a matter of fact, soon, probably in a year or 2, it will be difficult or impossible to do a vaccine study where you're using a placebo, because the vaccine, the standard of care will be vaccines that are easily accessible to the population. And so the short of the long answer is that yes, for now, there will be no requirement for a vaccine that has already been registered, because it's not going to be available. But sooner or later, and in my estimate, it will be in 2 or 3 years, it will be impossible to conduct a trial and make it an ethical trial if you're not using a comparator vaccine that is already being used. Number 2, the issues of East, I'm totally in agreement with you. The challenge that we've had for some time, when you're talking about East, you're really talking about China, and a little East, but not quite East, is Russia, where they have these vaccines giving to their population, but we don't know much about them. It would be of interest if we can be able to get the dossier and see what kind of vaccines these are, what are the efficacy, what are the safety profiles of this vaccine. And of course, because if we get those vaccines, the regulatory authority that is responsible for determining whether a vaccine should be registered in the country or not is the Pharmacy and Poisons Board. It will be in the interest of the Pharmacy and Poisons Board to get this dossier and review. And if they are found to be useful, to be registered, I would see no problem at all in getting a vaccine from the East. Finally, this pause thing, that is very, very important. And it's important for people to know that for any clinical trial, it's not just vaccine trials, and for this matter, not just COVID vaccine trial, any clinical trial testing a drug or a vaccine, if there is any concern from any site that is participating in that clinical trial, you pause and then review the data and analyze and dig down to find out what exactly happened before you then resume or completely stop the trial. And so that is normal, and it will happen over and over again. Like, for example, in this proposed trial that we are going to participate in, there'll be about 200 sites. So anything that is happening in any of those sites, even if it is not happening here in Kenya, let's say, for example, something happens in Brazil where the vaccine is being tested. Let's say somebody develops very high fever and is admitted, or somebody gets a convulsion after the vaccine. We pause. All the sites all over the world pause. They don't give the vaccine until we've determined what has caused that problem. And this is for safety reasons. And many times they investigate and they find that the person who developed that fever, for example, had a malaria or something. Then we know that the person had fever and convulsion because of malaria that they had. And then all the sites are resume vaccination because you have determined what the issue is. So that is a normal thing. I know that in the Pfizer vaccine, there was a pause and the world panicked, but it's just that they didn't fully understand how clinical trials are conducted. It is not unique to vaccines, nor to COVID-19 vaccines.
Yeah, may I add something, Prof, to the, yeah, what I also want to add from what, this is Professor Nzala, from what Masika is asking, there are going to be three things. The science of vaccine is so heightened, and our understanding is also so heightened, because the questions that each country is going to ask itself, does a vaccine prevent infection? Or does the vaccine prevent disease? Or the vaccine prevent transmission? These will be the criteria. Then the next thing will be, how long does the protection take? And do you need boosters? All these vaccines, if we go into real details, are actually doing different things. Even those prevent disease, the question is that, does it prevent disease or does it actually just prevent symptoms? So any country, and the PPB is not just going to license, each country will have to ask themselves these questions and then say, out of all these priorities, which product gives me value for money? Which of these products actually gives me value for money, and which one do I want? Then the issue then is, does a country need to vaccinate each and everybody? We have 50 million. Is there a segment of population that we can actually vaccinate? And we know very well vaccines can lead to herd immunity and reduce susceptible cases. So that is a question that we must ask. So the issue of vaccinating the entire population may not arise. The issue of what is appropriate vaccine for a country like ours will arise. And the issue of what we want this vaccine to do, infection, disease, transmission, and how long. All these things will actually come into question as we begin to think of licensure, and also we begin to think of what vaccines to bring. But also to note, Prof. Jaoko is, and as we are discussing this and others, realize as of now there is no vaccine, COVID vaccine that has been licensed, none. All licensure is under emergency use authorization for now, because all of them are still undergoing phase 3. So again, we want all the healthcare workers to be aware of that. So even if you hear of Moderna, Pfizer, Chadox, and even the one we want to test here at Coveted, all these vaccines are under clinical trial, and none of them has actually been licensed. Over.
Thank you very much, Professor Zala. Can I see? I can see Ivy Muya has raised the hand. Would you want to ask a question?
Ivy, can she be unmuted? So before Ivy comes, there is another popular question. Personally, it's I am inclined to asking this question. Munira is asking, does someone who has already suffered from COVID-19 actually require vaccination? Is their immune system already primed? So shouldn't they be exempt from the need for vaccination?
Yeah, so that's an important question. And the short answer is that yes, you need to be vaccinated. And this is this has been agreed on generally by all scientists, because one of the things is that the antibodies or the immune response generated by natural infection does not seem to be capable of protecting you from getting a reinfection. And the other thing is that we don't even know how long it will last. Similar to the protection that will be generated by these vaccines, we need to follow people for a long period of time to know how long the protection lasts. And that links to what Professor Nzala was talking about. Then that will determine as to how often we need a booster. So the short of it now is that even if you have been infected naturally, you still need a vaccination.
Yes, and also to add is that we are already getting data to show that there are a segment of population after maybe 3 or 4 months undergo seroreversion. They were seropositive before, then they quickly undergo seroreversion, meaning that the immune system, the immune response through natural infection may not last that long. Over.
Thank you. I think we were avoiding immunity, majority of us. I mean the vaccination. Richard Aya is asking, what is the indemnity around the vaccine? He says, I think UK has indemnified a company against claims arising from potential adverse effects. What about Kenya?
Oh, I actually don't know about Kenya. So that would be more of the Ministry of Health as to whether they are going to indemnify them. But for participation in a clinical trial, one of the requirements for any clinical trial is that the sponsor of the clinical trial must have an insurance to compensate anybody who is injured by participation in a clinical trial. That is a requirement before the Pharmacy and Poisons Board for any clinical trial. So before any trial is started, there has to be an insurance statement for any trial-related injury. But with regard to products that are being licensed, I don't know whether the government has indemnified the manufacturer.
Actually, Prof, what is going to happen is that when you get a vaccine or even a drug under emergency use authorization, you will indemnity. You cannot take the company or the product manufacturer to court, because at that time we are actually using the product prior to proper licensure. So under these conditions, if our country that we are going to bring vaccines and use them under emergency use authorization, then the government will have to indemnify, or somebody else. That's actually what is happening at the moment.
Thank you very much, Professor. Another infamous question is, what are the strategies that should be done according to misinformation of the vaccine? We've seen a lot of videos on social media. People are doing it for fun, but we all know the effects, yeah, on TikTok and Twitter and Facebook. So how do we tackle that? Or how are we tackling that?
Yeah, thank you for that question. That's a very important question. The ramifications of the misinformation in social media can be very diverse. And I think one of the things is just to have more and more correct and useful information also being posted in this social media. I think personally, I've been thinking this is a social scientist area to study, like what motivates people to forward or to post such misleading information, there must be something that social behavioral scientists will be able to help us to determine here. Because if you look at the anti-vaccine lobbyist groups, there are even the vaccine that we give our children in the expanded program for immunization. We will not take our children for vaccinations. One post saying that the children who get polio vaccines mental retardation, and you and I know that is really not. Would all our 40% of our children would be mentally retarded from getting vaccinated. But just post things and they become viral and spread everywhere, misinforming people globally and causing a lot of disservice. I don't know, maybe the panel would have some suggestions as to how we can be able to counter this information.
Dr. Maritim, any suggestions? Okay, but I agree. Maybe we should loop in the social behavioral scientists together with marketers, because we also need to counteract. We have also trending things to advocate for vaccines.
Yeah, I think we put the correct messages so that if you have more and more correct messages, that would go a long way in helping.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Correct messages, which is fun because apparently most people like trending things. So
yes,
maybe they can partner and come up with good. Another question.
Amina, I'm back. Sorry.
Okay. Yeah, tell me.
This is Dr. Maritim, Amina.
Yes.
Yeah. So I just wanted to say a few things about the issue about the misinformation and the consequences. So it eventually leads to what we call vaccine hesitancy, and then it will impact on the uptake of the vaccine. So we may see a situation where the vaccine is available and no one is presenting to even receive the vaccine. So it goes hand in hand with generating the demand. So I think one of the things that we really need to do is probably even use this platform to educate a lot of our people, which includes healthcare workers. So we need to even talk to the healthcare workers, use this forum to sensitize them so that when the vaccine lands in the country, for example, in February, we actually have people queuing to receive the vaccine. But if we have a situation where people now are doubting the vaccine, wondering whether the vaccine will have adverse events, and we've seen the question asked about the indemnity, then we need really to message so that if our healthcare workers will be the ones that will be seen as accepting the vaccine, so that by the time we are reaching the other populations that have been prioritized, including the people who have comorbidities, then we've generated that demand. And one of the things probably that has contributed even to this is we have a very robust program for pediatric vaccines, but our adult vaccines have lagged behind, yet we know that there are so many other vaccines that are beneficial to adults. So in the new immunization policy for 2021 to 2030, we're actually looking at a vaccination over a life course of a person, where we are also encouraging other adult people to receive vaccination. And we want to encourage like a family-centered approach for vaccines and immunization going forward. So I think we need to use a lot of platform, use mass media, and even have the messaging from the highest level of the ministry, where we are talking positively about vaccines so that we don't contribute to some of the misconception, especially if you have some negative messaging from people who are who hold very high positions, then it can trickle down and is sensationalized, maybe even by the media when they are during some of the press conferences. So we need to have a positive outlook and always pass a positive message and educate the masses of benefit vaccine.
Okay, maybe just to add, maybe we've been a bit quiet as to how much work we do at CAVI, and I'm actually very grateful to Prof. Jaoko to having put together this webinar. Let me put it very clear that there are two licensed Ebola vaccines. One of them is from the Merck Pharmaceutical, and that is a recombinant vaccine whose backbone is a vesicular stomatitis virus. The second vaccine is from Janssen & Janssen, And it's also a recombinant vaccines, 2 vaccines. One is an adeno 26, meaning it's made from adenovirus as the backbone. And the other one is the MVA. The MVA is just the modified vaccinia ankara backbone, the smallpox vaccine. The Janssen & Janssen vaccine, we actually conducted a phase 2 and a phase 1 here at Kavi. We had more than enough volunteers. That vaccine went on to perform very well, very good immune responses. We brought in adolescents. We also brought in HIV positive individuals. We also brought in the elderly, because this vaccine is an actual vaccine that is geared to the entire population. The only people we didn't test were actually pregnant women. Now, that vaccine, the 2 vaccines have been licensed. So the recombinant vaccines now have a precedence, and the volunteerism in terms of putting these vaccines through is good. Both vaccines, the Janssen & Janssen vaccine, are now being given to healthcare workers in Rwanda, DRC Congo, and Western Uganda. So the precedence of doing good work is already here. The Ebola vaccines that Prof. Jauko mentioned, the Janssen & Janssen, phase 2, 1 and phase 2 were actually tested here in Kenya and here at Kavi. Over.
Wow, Professor, you're right. Maybe it's an issue of majority of us. We are not really aware about what's happening in Kavi. And I believe this is a very good platform where we can discuss such information and have these discussions. We see the good outcomes that we've been having.
Can
I
I?
don't know. Yeah,
Can
please.
It's Ivy. Hi, everyone. Happy New Year.
Happy New
I'll
Year
keep
to you.
it short. Yes,
Yes.
since I tried to type the whole message, but I'll just give the narrative first. Professor Jauko, thank you very much. Proud to say I'm one of your products from UON, BSN class of 204. Second question, because you said that the COVID-19 vaccine is also developed from pre-existing vaccines such as Ebola. Question 1, is it safe to say those who have received Ebola are moderately safe if they don't or if they're not prioritized to receive the COVID-19 vaccine? Number 2, would it then be safe to say that people who've received Ebola vaccine should not be in the inclusion criteria? Question number 3, in other related and unrelated news in terms of prioritization, for now we're in Mali. Before we were in DRC supporting Ebola response. But the general mindset of everyone is, well, since we got the Ebola vaccine, then we don't need to be in a rush to get the COVID-19 vaccine yet. The Secretary General of the United Nations has prioritized that staff and anyone who is supporting any mission like this one in Mali should definitely strive to be part of the system-wide approach to vaccinations. And then that just triggers to what I think Professor Maritim talked about, vaccine hesitancy. So that, and I'm talking about healthcare workers, because when we were in DRC, it was not an option. In the Ebola response, you had to get the vaccine. Over to you.
Oh, thank you, Evie, and thank you for the good work you're doing. You're an ambassador out there. I just need to clarify what we mean by saying that the COVID-19 vaccines are building on the platform such as the ones that were used for Ebola. It doesn't mean that it's the same vaccine. The platform just means that this infrastructure, the things that are used to develop the vaccines are the same, but then the antigens are different. So if you're going to develop a vaccine against Ebola, you use antigens for Ebola, so that when the body recognizes these antigens, it thinks that it has been infected by Ebola, and so it produces immune responses against Ebola. Those immune responses will not protect you against COVID. So for COVID, you're using the same platform. For example, if you're going to use a vector like we've talked about, so for example, one of the vectors that is being used in COVID-19 is an adenovirus, which is acting as a vector. So when you talk about a platform using the same adenovirus, but then you're putting the genes for COVID-19, whereas for Ebola, you put the genes for Ebola. So there will be no cross protection between Ebola and COVID-19. So the healthcare workers and the people working in Ebola areas, endemic areas, need to get a COVID-19 vaccine.
So
Noted. Thank you very much.
thank you, Ivy. I'm glad you were able to ask your questions. They were very informative by themselves. Mugo, are you able to speak? Waruru Mugo?
Mugo. No, let me get.
Okay. So there's a question, it's a bit controversial, but like I said, controversial things have a way of trending more. There's a Frida Koski, she's, who's asking, how about something that went around, that when the vaccine is injected into the penis, then it works faster. So have you had, personally I've not had something like that, but probably Prof, you've had of such narration.
I also have not heard of that, and I'm wondering whether there is any scientific basis for that. And for that to happen, there must have been some clinical trials to test it, which I'm not aware of any having been done in that way. So this is again one of those things that people just, it's so easy to cook up something and just put it in social media and it will really trend. So I can think of, I can just put anything. So that's the problem with the social media. It's not vetted, it is not peer reviewed. So I'm afraid that I have no information on that.
Yeah, no, it's just to remove the myth, because it's a likely thing to trend. It's
Sure. And so for us, actually, one of the things that we should be able to do before you forward any message any of these things that you get from social media, ask yourself the question whether it's really possible. I mean, a lot of this you can very easily dismiss just with the scientific knowledge that you have, because once you forward it and then somebody else forwarded, it just leads into a lot of misinformation. Thanks.
I agree with you, Prof. It's good to verify facts before sharing. So another question is, can these vaccines counter new infections arising because of mutations?
Yeah, thank you. That's an important question. That is one of the questions that many of the vaccinologists are thinking, grappling with. Just last week, or is it early this week, there's some more evidence coming to show that the Pfizer vaccine can work against the new mutation, the UK and South African mutations. And so to answer those questions, you need to test. Nobody can tell you for certain until we're able to test and verify that the vaccine will be working against this new variant. There is scientifically, you'd think that there is a very good chance that it would work, but to show for sure, you'd have to test.
Waruru Amuga, are you able to speak now?
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Great. I really want to thank Professor Jaoko, and maybe for the audience, Dr. Arura Mugo, and a major campaign for vaccination as a pediatrician. I certainly feel before this vaccine lands here, we need to also have a very proactive group of vaccine supporters, not only for this vaccine alone, but indeed to let our populace know that vaccines, a lot of work is done on them, and there is nobody, a doctor or a scientist, who will bring something into your arm to harm you, or to collect data from you, or to follow you up in future. I think we have a big task. I was just raising this issue so that we could also rally behind in various groups to explain to our populations in many languages that this vaccine has been tried and we need to be part of the world in getting the vaccine over. Thank you.
Yeah, I can't agree more, Dr. Mugo. That is, we should be advocates of these vaccines wherever we are. Thank you.
Yeah, just to also add, as we talk about the new variants, 3 or 4 things when you talk about the new COVID variant. And this is what we are now referring to variants of COVID. So a COVID-19 virus variant of concern would be a variant affect diagnosis, a variant that may increase transmission, a variant that may result in escape to the vaccine, or a variant that might actually cause severe disease. So when you hear of COVID vaccine variants, these are the 4 things that we are concerned with. Either it begins to interfere with diagnosis or transmission or escape or results to severe disease. So what we can say is that we are beginning also even in Kenya to look at this very, very critically. And then it begs the question that as we choose and pick the kind of vaccines we have into this country, we must also try to understand which is the most common strain, and is this common strain amenable to the vaccine that we are bringing? Because SARS-CoV being an RNA virus, RNA viruses are actually very prone to mutations. These mutations might lead to any of these concerns that we are talking about. So those are the issues that we are looking at it holistically when you talk of the new variants. Over.
Thank you very much. Is Eda Buta able to speak? Eda? Okay. I think there was somebody who was asking what they would like a comment on Kenya manufacturing COVID-19 vaccine. I've heard about the joining the trials, but I think they're asking about manufacturing. Are we there yet?
No, we're not there yet. I think maybe the person asking should be aware that we actually don't make any vaccines in Kenya. There is an initiative by the government through the Ministry of Health for local vaccine manufacturing, especially in view of the fact that we have become a middle-income country, and soon we will not be getting vaccines from Gavi, the Global Alliance for Vaccines. And so there is an initiative that was started last year, but it will not be for COVID vaccines. So first of all, the priority, there are so many vaccines that we need to be able to make our own, especially the childhood vaccines, the polios, the BCGs, the measles, and the tetanus, and so on. And once we have that capability, then it is easy to expand it to other new and emerging diseases.
Okay, thank you very much. A lot of people are asking to comment on the new strain, and I think you've answered in form of the vaccine. However, I've had several discussions with different people where they're saying we're getting a lot of negatives of late, the trends. So I don't know. Is it that the labs are the reagents able to pick this new variant? It's a common question I've been asked in a lot of forums.
I don't know if Prof. Anzala is there, so that will be more of his area. For me, I'm not aware of any variant that has at the moment escapes detection by the existing PCR methods that we have. I don't know if Prof, are you still there?
Yeah, I'm still here. The RT-PCR we use targets 3 genes, and the RNA-dependent RNA, the nuclear capsid, and part of it could be the spike protein or the membrane. So it depends on the assay, but so far, a lot of the virus the variants that we have seen so far, what we are seeing are mutations in the spike protein. And so far, what we know that these mutations have not, even in Europe itself, have not affected diagnosis. So if somebody presents with COVID defining signs and symptoms, and then does not end up being COVID positive, might not really mean that the test has missed that. More needs to be done actually to make that diagnosis. But the idea is to have a very robust surveillance system that looks at the common variants that are circulating, where the mutations are, and whether these mutations will actually affect the the four things we are talking about: the disease, the diagnosis, the transmission, escape from the vaccine, and whether they lead to severe disease. So that is actually an initiative that is taking place globally, and Kenya has actually started. Cambridge Kilifi is taking leadership in our sequencing and the discussion we discussed last week, and the data we have also looked at this week. So far, we don't think that any of the circulating variants in this country have escaped diagnosis. Over.
Thank you. So maybe the last question, Edda, are you able to speak now? Edda? Okay, so Regina? Regina? I think they're having technical challenges. So I think we've covered majority of the things. Thank you very much, Professor, for the very, very informative session. You have clearly dispelled a lot of myths that are going on, especially amongst COVID survivors. I can speak for myself. We mostly assume we are, we are okay. We don't need the vaccine. So clearly we'll start signing up for that CAVI phase program. Maybe one more question. Is it a requirement for you to be negative before taking the vaccine?
For COVID, so we will be using something. We'll be looking at antibodies. Somebody talked about the antibodies, again, naturally acquired. It will not be an exclusion criteria. We'll have a few people who test antibody positive for COVID into the study. And again, that is for the purposes of seeing whether the vaccination has any benefit to those people who have had the natural infection. So we will be looking at antibodies. So there'll be the study participants will be into large group will be antibody negative, but there'll be a small group that will be antibody positive.
Okay. Any comments or any questions from the panelists?
Yeah. For me, really is to encourage healthcare workers to only disseminate things that are really authentic and true. And we are here at CAVI. We have good information. We are following these COVID vaccines and anything to do with COVID, very, very closely. So should you come across literature and you are not sure, before you disseminate, just pick up a phone or email us and say, what do you guys, make of this? If we don't have the answer, we have ways of coordinating with the global community so that as healthcare workers, we only communicate things that are totally authentic. And also at the same time, let us be advocates of vaccines, as Prof. Jaoko has actually just said, as Dr. Mugo has said, as Dr. Maritim has said, we must actually be the ones, the front healthcare workers that we are, to ensure that we reduce we reduce hesitancy as much as possible, and we also ensure that we educate our community. So answers are here, and we can be able to do that. So let's have additional more webinars if there are issues that we can actually discuss so that we dispel all these rumors. When I hear somebody talking of that a vaccine can be given on the penis, it pains me, because as healthcare workers, we know how vaccines are administered. So those are the issues, ladies and gentlemen. And I'll appeal that many of you please email to us, talk to us, and let's be ready to participate in the clinical trial that we are planning at CAVI. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Professor. So I think the keynote message is let's verify information before we forward to other people. We're healthcare workers. We have a lot of audiences. You might not know it, but a lot of people are listening to you, and they acknowledge that you're a profession. So be careful with what you say. Verify what you say. We have our mentors like Prof. Anzala and Professor, who are more than willing to assist us and guide us. Professor Walter, thank you very much for the beautiful presentation. It was short, precise, and it was very clear, the message. So I hope you can join in again on Thursday. We'll have another session on utilizing e-health strategy to optimize healthcare delivery. Thank you very much. Have a good afternoon.
Thank you very much.
Thank you all.
Okay, thank you all. Bye-bye for now.
Thank you. Bye. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Yes, Prof. Yes. Oh, thank you.